The ongoing situation between Russia and Ukraine has led many Canadians here in Canada to wonder what steps should be taken in order to protect the sovereign and independent state of Ukraine. And joining me now to discuss this and more is Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, Bob Rae. Ambassador Rae, thanks so much for speaking with me and for making the time amidst what's obviously, I'm sure, a very busy and challenging time for the United Nations and for yourself. Perhaps we can start out with one piece. Obviously, Russia is a part of the United Nations, and I know you've been asked this question before, but I'll ask it again for some people who maybe haven't heard your response to this. How do you plan on taking action against Russia in the United Nations when Russia itself is a part of the UN?
Well, the UN is a place where all the countries in the world come together. That's what it is. And we have many different parts of the UN system where we all work. In some areas we work together, other areas we're challenged. We face a real challenge now with Russia because they have invaded their neighbor, Ukraine, the country that's next door to them. So Canada's been actively involved for the last several weeks in trying to rally countries who agree with us that the invasion is illegal, that it's harmful, it's hurtful, it's dangerous, it's a threat to world peace and security. And since the Security Council doesn't really work because Russia has a veto on this issue, all of the focus has to get back to the General Assembly to allow us to move forward. So we've now had three emergency debates on Ukraine. First one in the end of February, and we've had two other ones since that time. And we've really tried to focus on the getting Russia to stop. We don't have the force of arms to do that, but Canada is working with other countries to make sure that Ukraine has the means to resist the aggression. In the United Nations, we're trying to do everything we can on the humanitarian situation. So we're raising money. And we're doing everything we can to help the UN organize its efforts to assist the millions and millions of people who've been displaced by what's happening. And obviously, we're continuing a discussion at the UN, a debate at the UN about what more we can do. Some of them involve taking Russia to court with international courts. Some of them involve the sanctions, which we are applying to Russia as a punishment for what they've done, but also as a way of convincing them pressuring them to stop the war and to get to a negotiating table with Ukraine. And on that score, we're following those negotiations very closely because we know they're happening today and tomorrow in Turkey. So there's a lot of different moving parts. But it's important to realize that it's not about kicking Russia out. It's about making them stay and listen to what we're objecting to and why we think there needs to be a different approach. So that's what we're doing here.
Many countries, obviously, including Canada, have imposed sanctions against Russia. It doesn't really seem to change the actions of what Russia is doing towards Ukraine. I mean, is that a sign as to, we have to do more than sanctions? And if so, what more can we do than sanctions?
Well, I think you've got to understand the sanctions take time. But I think it would be a mistake to think that they're not having an effect. Russia's economy has been seriously affected by the sanctions. These are the most severe sanctions that we've ever imposed on another country, ever. We've never done as broad-based and as widespread an approach to sanctions as we've now been able to do in the last 3 weeks. So the sanctions story is actually quite a remarkable story, but it doesn't have an immediate impact, although I think it is having a very powerful impact over time, and it accumulates. And so the fact that Russia is now going outside Russia, going to Turkey for a peace discussion is an indication that it's not the way it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago. They are, whether we succeed or not this round, we don't know, but we do need to kind of keep the pressure up. So the sanctions will have to continue to be tightened. And frankly, the other thing we have to do is to keep on supplying Ukraine with the weapons that allow it to respond to the aggressive action of Russia. And that decision has been, I think, clearly taken by the members of the NATO alliance and other countries. And so we're doing everything we can to get the necessary supplies to Ukraine to allow them to resist the war that's being waged by Russia against them.
When Minister Jolie joined the show yesterday, I asked her the same question that I want to ask you, and it's what is the United Nations going to do to prevent, Russia from committing the same actions that they're committing against Ukraine to other sovereign, independent democracies?
Well, you put me on the spot because I don't know what she said and answer your question, so I better make sure I say the same thing as my boss. I think what we need to do is to keep the pressure up. I think the kind of sanctions we're putting in place, the measures we're taking with Ukraine, it's what we call a deterrence effect. The more we can deter Russia, discourage Russia, make them understand that there's a cost, there's a pain involved to what they're doing, and we have to get them in a better direction. And right now, I think we're focusing as much attention as we possibly can on the need for a ceasefire and the need for a more a different way of dealing with the differences between Russia and Ukraine. Going to war over these issues is never the answer, and we have to do everything we can to show Russia that there's a very high cost to be paid for doing what they do.
Basically all NATO countries, a large portion of countries in the United Nations as well, are obviously condemning the situation in Russia and Ukraine. But beyond just Russia, we know there's countries like Belarus, for example, who are, siding with Russia in this invasion. How do you take action against those countries?
Same way, they're included in the sanctions. They're included in all of the sanctions that we bring in. They're included, and they're included in every effort we make to make change happen. The Belarusians are not happy at all with being lumped in, but they should be lumped in because effectively they become a satellite state of Russia. So they're doing Russia's bidding, and what they're doing is also illegal. So we're taking additional steps against them.